In our last episode, we talked about Hal's deposition of his father as his father lay dying on his bed. This feature of deposing kings starts with Richard II, is played out in Henry IV, Part 1 between Hal and Falstaff, and then appears again in Henry IV, Part 2 when Hal picks up the crown and walks away. Now, what about Henry V's reign? Now remember, in Richard II, the final act was dedicated to the new king, Henry IV. So what about Henry V? There are two important scenes that tie into our earlier discussion about allegories. One, the elevation of justice, and two, the rejection of vice. In other words, Falstaff. Now, no one expects anything good from Hal. In fact, he has to convince everyone that he will be a good king. Brothers, you mix your sadness with some fear. This is the English, not the Turkish court. Not Amurath and Amurath succeeds, but Harry. The problem is everyone knows who Harry or Hal is. He's not going to have them executed. They know that. Instead, he's going to let all his friends from Eastcheap become prominent. In other words, he's going to bring the tavern into the palace. Now remember, Henry IV Part 2 has to have a final reform scene because Hal will become England's greatest king. Henry V is considered one of the great kings. So how does this reform happen? It begins when King Henry IV's Lord Chief Justice is awaiting his fate. Everyone thinks he's going to get the axe. Why? Because he once imprisoned Hal for hitting him, as Falstaff's little page notes. Sir, here comes the nobleman that committed the prince for striking him about Bardolph. We don't know what he's talking about. Shakespeare is making an allusion to a popular play that inspired both Henry IV Part 2 and Henry V. It's called The Famous Victories of Henry V. No one knows who wrote the play because, as we've seen with the first quarto of Richard II, authors do not necessarily show up on the title page. You're selling the movie. You're not selling the director or the screenwriter. It's the same idea. So when Hal comes in to the room as the new king, although he still retains the speech suffix of prince, perhaps because he's not ready to be the King Henry V that history is calling upon, he sees the Lord Chief Justice. I am assured, if I be measured rightly, your majesty hath no just cause to hate me. Prince, no. How might a prince of my great hopes forget so great indignities you laid upon me? What? Rate or scold, rebuke and roughly send to prison the immediate heir of England? Was this easy? May this be washed in Lethe, that's this river forgetfulness, and forgotten? This is the time of revenge. It's at this moment that the man, this Lord Chief Justice, becomes an allegorical figure of justice found in the medieval morality plays. He names and defines himself as such. I then did use the person of your father. The image of his power lay then in me, and in the administration of his law, whilst I was busy for the commonwealth. Your highness pleased to forget my place. He's talking about Hal. The majesty and power of law and justice, the image of the king whom I presented and struck me in my very seat of judgment, whereon, as an offender to your father, I gave bold way to my authority and did commit you. In other words, when Hal struck him, he was actually striking his father's justice. Hal saw him as a person. He never saw him as the embodiment or personification of the king's justice. Hal forgot about that position. And as representative of his father's law, he asks Hal to imagine himself as king to a bad son. Number 14, question your royal thoughts. Make the case yours. Be now the father and propose a son. Imagine a son. In that case, imagine a bad son. We're back in Henry IV, Part 1. Imagining new questions between fathers and sons. This time with King Henry V in his father's position. We've already saw that, remember, when Hal first rejects Falstaff. Falstaff played Hal, and Hal played his father. Now, Hal is the true father. Hear your own dignity so much profaned. See your own dreadful laws so loosely slighted. Dreadful in the sense of that should cause fear. Behold yourself so by a son disdained, and then imagine me taking your part as justice, and in your power soft silencing your son, like quietly or gently silencing your son, after this cold considerance, sentence me, and as you are a king, speak in your state. Speak as a king, not as a person, individual person. What I have done that misbecame my place, my person, or my liege's sovereignty. And this is where justice becomes an allegory. Prince, you are right, justice, and you weigh this well. Therefore, still bear the balance and the sword, and I do wish your honors may increase, till you do live to see a son of mine offend you and obey you as I did. So shall I live to speak my father's words. Happy am I that have a man so bold that dares do justice on my proper son, and not less happy having such a son that would deliver up his greatness so into the hands of justice. There's your reform. And when we see Hal next, he will be designated as the king in his speech prefixes. Now let's talk about the rejection of vice. This is a rich work, two allegories at odds. Justice and vice, one on each side of Hal's shoulders. Just like in the cartoons with the devil and the angel, here's justice and here's vice. And each of them are whispering in his ears. Fortunately for Hal, or Henry V, stern justice wins. And this happens after the coronation. Falstaff is completely excited. He's eager to cash in on his buddy's fortune and reap further rewards now that his drinking buddy is king. So the king's party is passing. It's the coronation. Falstaff. God save thy grace, King Hal, my royal Hal. Pistol. The heaven thee guard and keep most royal imp of fame. Imp meaning offspring of fame. Pistol is so funny. All bombast parodies of theatrical discourses, while Falstaff seems more heartfelt, excited, expectant, manipulative. Falstaff. God save thee, my sweet boy. King, my Lord Chief Justice, speak to that vain man, that foolish man. Lord Chief Justice, have you your wits? Know you what 'tis you speak? Falstaff. My king, my Jove, I speak to thee, my heart. Notice that the Lord Justice is now Hal's companion. And he, as the new companion, rebukes Falstaff for crossing the line. Hal is now king. Will you be serious, man? As for Hal, he's not Hal anymore. He's a king. And you notice it in the gravity of his speech. I know thee not, old man. Fall to thy prayers. How ill white hair becomes a fool and jester. Falstaff's white hairs should signify gravitas. Wise, weighty, serious, not foolishness. Even Hal, let's call him Henry V now. is now under the influence of justice in terms of language. Henry presents himself as if he's waking from a bad dream. I have long dreamt of such a kind of man, so surfeit swelled and he's bloated with excess, so old and so profane. But being awaked, I do despise my dream. Then he gives Falstaff some advice. Reform yourself. Make less thy body hence, and more thy grace. Leave gormandizing, gluttony. Know the grave doth gape for thee thrice wider than for other men. In other words, when he's buried, it's going to be a huge coffin or hole because he's so fat. That's a joke. Remember, he's still Hal, but that joke should not be answered. Falstaff's face must make him think he's about to make a joke. So Henry V cuts it off and says, reply not to me with a full-born jest. Presume not that I am the thing I was, for God doth know, so shall the world perceive, that I have turned away my former self. So will I those that kept me company. When thou dost hear I am as I have been, approach me, and thou shalt be as thou wast, the tutor and the feeder of my riots. Till then I banish thee on pain of death, as I have done the rest of my misleaders, not to come near our person by 10 mile. Falstaff is banished, just as he feared in Henry IV, Part 1. Then there's a shift in tone. If you're conscious of early modern pronouns, there's a change in the way he addresses Falstaff. Before, it was informal. I speak to thee. Thee and thou, those are informal use. I know thee not. Make less thy body known. I banish thee. And then he becomes the royal we, and he starts to use the formal you once Falstaff has been banished. Hal is now a king. And he's gone. But he's offered his subject, note that word now. Falstaff's not a friend, he's a subject. He's offered his subject an annuity. That's kind of like a paycheck, yearly paycheck, because he knows that Falstaff robs to sustain his drinking. He's trying to push Falstaff towards reform. But how can you reform vice? And Falstaff is in complete shock, and he's scrambling. Do not you grieve at this. I shall be sent for in private to him. Look you, he must seem thus to the world. Fear not your advancements. He's promised them a lot of stuff. I will be the man yet that shall make you great. The play ends on a very sobering note. Justice and the sober younger brother of Hal, or Henry V, John of Lancaster, the one that doesn't drink, but has a malicious streak in the way he tricks the archbishop and the conspirators. They arrest Falstaff. And then John makes a prophecy about future wars in France. Prince John, the king hath called his parliament, my lord. Lord Chief Justice, he hath. Prince John, I will lay odds that ere before this year expire, we bear our civil swords and native fire as far as France. I heard a bird so sing, whose music to my thinking pleased the king. Come, will you hence? King Henry V has been seduced by a new song. Not the drunken songs in the taverns. And that new song leads us to the next play, Henry V.
Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell.